She didn't even remember his name. Why would she? He was just the janitor. The man who smelled faintly of bleach and old coffee, who wheeled his mop bucket past the lockers after the last bell rang. He never spoke unless spoken to, and even then only in short, quiet answers. His eyes didn't challenge. His posture didn't ask for anything. He moved like someone who'd long ago accepted being invisible. To Madison, that made him easy to mock. It was a Thursday afternoon, sunlight pouring through the tall windows of Hamilton Academy, gilding the tile floors like something sacred. But to her, it was just another golden hour for entertainment. Reggie had just finished wiping down a spill by the vending machines when Madison strutted past with her friends. Heels clicking, laughter preloaded. "Ew," she said loud enough for him to hear. "Didn't they invent gloves in, like, the 1800s? Her voice was syrupy sweet but edged with venom. The other girls giggled. One made a gagging sound. Another muttered something about that janitor smell. Reggie didn't flinch. He didn't raise his head. He just wrung out his mop and moved it gently across the floor in long, practiced strokes. That annoyed her more than if he'd snapped back. His calmness felt like a dare. She dropped her phone intentionally, right next to the dirty water bucket. "You gonna clean that too?" she smirked. He looked at her then, just for a second. His eyes weren't angry. They were tired, deep, the kind of eyes that had seen more than they should have. Without a word, he stooped down, picked up her phone, and wiped the edge carefully on his sleeve before handing it back. Madison hesitated a second too long before grabbing it. He nodded once, then turned back to his mop. That was supposed to be the end of it. Just another laugh at the man no one noticed. But later, when the building burned, and smoke filled the halls, and screams echoed off concrete, and she found herself alone, crawling blindly toward a stairwell she couldn't find, it would be that same man, that same mop-wielding ghost, who came for her, and she would never laugh the same way again. The building was never really silent. Not even after hours. Pipes hissed like whispers in the walls. Vents coughed dust. Lights buzzed with the fatigue of long years. And always, somewhere beneath it all, was the low, steady rhythm of a mop swaying across linoleum. That rhythm belonged to Reggie. No one called him Mr. Reggie. Not officially. On the roster, he was Facilities Reginald T. Baker. But no one used his full name. In fact, most didn't use his name at all. The students called him that janitor when they mentioned him, which was rarely. Teachers waved absently, or gave tight-lipped nods as they passed, as if acknowledging him counted as charity. Administrators? They knew his schedule more than his face. But Reggie knew them all. He knew which teachers stayed late and which ones faked sick days. He knew which students snuck vape pens into the locker room and which ones cried quietly in the library when no one else noticed. He'd seen tears wiped away before they fell. He'd seen bruises hidden under sleeves. Reggie didn't say much, but his silence wasn't ignorance. It was witness. He arrived each day at 3:45 p.m., just as the last period bell echoed through the marble-floored atrium of Hamilton Academy. While students fled for home, sports, or sushi spots their parents' credit cards covered, Reggie moved in the opposite direction, carrying his old brown thermos and a satchel that had long lost its shape. His walk was even, purposeful, not fast, never rushed, the kind of walk that said, "I've learned to carry time, not chase it." By 4 o'clock, he'd be unlocking the janitor's closet on the second floor. No one noticed how carefully he arranged his tools. The mop handle always leaned to the left of the bucket. Cleaning rags folded by color. Spray bottles aligned in perfect rows like soldiers on inspection. His gloves, thick and worn, rested on the shelf like folded hands in prayer. There was a quiet reverence to how he prepared each evening. Not because he worshipped the work, but because he refused to do it half-heartedly. Somewhere deep in his bones, Reggie still believed in doing things right, even if no one else ever saw it. At exactly 4:30 he would eat. Not at a table. Not in the break room. He preferred the far end of the library, under a narrow window that caught the last edge of sunset. There he'd unwrap his sandwich slowly, pour lukewarm coffee from the thermos, and pull out a worn paperback. Usually something by Baldwin or Maya Angelou. Some days it was poetry. Other days it was manuals from the fire department's old collection. Remnants of a different life, stacked neatly inside his satchel like pages of a former chapter. No one ever asked Reggie about his past. They assumed he'd always been what he was now. People like Madison and her friends didn't care to imagine that the man they mocked had once stood in flames for a living, had once carried children out of burning buildings in his arms, that he'd once had a badge, family, a future that looked nothing like mops and silence. But Reggie didn't tell his story unless it was earned. Silence, to him, wasn't weakness. It was strength measured. His scars told more than his words ever did. The one along his left forearm, thin and long like a whip of melted plastic, came from a blaze in a Detroit apartment complex. 2 kids trapped inside, a gas leak waiting to blow. Reggie went in when others hesitated. The children lived. His partner didn't. He never talked about that day. But every time his glove pressed against that scar as he scrubbed a wall, he remembered. After the fire that took his wife, an electrical short in their bedroom lamp, a 911 call 2 minutes too late, he resigned. Not out of cowardice. Out of heartbreak. The fire had taken more than her body. It took the sound of her laugh from their home. It took the scent of her hair from his jacket. It took the way he believed the world made sense. For months he sat in silence. Then he packed what he had, moved south, and found work where no one knew him as a hero or a widower. Just Reggie, the janitor. Hamilton Academy was just a job. But in Reggie's eyes, every floor he polished, every locker he wiped, was a small attempt to keep something from falling apart. Order mattered to him. Cleanliness mattered. Not because of the rules, but because the world had once burned around him, and this was something he could still keep in order. He listened to classical music on an old Walkman while he worked, Mozart and Mahler, sometimes jazz when the night needed rhythm. The students who passed him by never noticed the faint hum under his breath as he mopped. They didn't see the way his feet moved almost like a dance, how he turned the mop like an artist spinning a brush. They didn't know that every now and then, as he passed the large window by the science lab, he'd stop just for a moment and let the moonlight hit his face. Not out of vanity, but remembrance. There were only a few who saw him, not fully but more than most. Mrs. Dorsey, the aging history teacher, once left a warm cookie on his cart during Christmas week. A 7th-grade boy named Eli nodded at him every afternoon without fail. Small gestures. But Reggie noticed. He always noticed. What he didn't notice, or perhaps chose not to, was how often he became the object of jokes. Madison was the ringleader, of course. Her jabs were always laced in performance. She didn't just insult Reggie for her own pleasure. It was a sport, a ritual of proving power. The tone of her voice when she said, "Your mop missed a spot," or the theatrical sniff when she passed him in the hallway, wasn't just mockery. It was a declaration. You don't belong here. Not in our world of wealth and whiteness. Not with your dark skin and your quiet eyes. What Reggie never let them see was how, after moments like those, he would pause, just for a second, behind a closed door, near the supply closet. He would take a deep breath, inhale, exhale, sometimes close his eyes, just long enough to hold back the memories of marching in Selma beside his uncle, of being spat on in '85 while wearing his fireman's uniform, of holding his wife's hand the night she told him, "The world may not see your worth, but I do." He kept her photo tucked inside his book, folded, worn, creased along the corners. Sometimes, late at night when the building had gone silent and the world had left him alone, he'd unfold it, run a thumb across her smile and whisper, "Still got work to do, baby." And then he'd rise, pick up his mop, and keep moving. That's what made him who he was. Not just the silence, but what he carried inside it. His dignity didn't shout. It stood, tall, unwavering, rooted. No one at Hamilton knew that the boiler in the West Wing had been giving off a low rattling sound for days. No one cared when Reggie logged a maintenance request marked minor issue. No one saw the way he touched the wall that day, the warmth that shouldn't have been there. He did. He saw. He knew something was coming. He didn't panic. He prepared, checked exits, watched student patterns, made mental notes. Which doors stuck, which fire alarms were old, where the extinguishers had been relocated during the last renovation. Reggie had lived long enough to know that life didn't wait for permission to fall apart. You had to be ready, and so he was, but still not a soul thanked him. They walked by him, stepped over his mop, sneered, rolled eyes, held their breath like his presence was an inconvenience. But Reggie never stopped moving. And when the smoke came and he would move again. Not because he wanted applause, not because he'd been mocked, but because saving lives was who he was. And even if they never saw him, he had always seen them. Madison Taylor had the kind of face that turned heads before her words ever had a chance to land. Blonde hair that fell in glossy waves, lips the shade of strawberries after summer, cheekbones sharp enough to cut silence. She was the image of beauty that yearbook covers loved and college brochures quietly hoped for. At Hamilton Academy, she wasn't just a student. She was a brand. President of the student council, lead in the school play, co-captain of the cheer squad, and the face of every fundraising gala her mother proudly chaired. But what people rarely asked, what they never really cared to know, was what lay beneath the gloss and glamour. Madison's life looked like a golden frame, but the portrait inside was slowly cracking. Her father, Richard Taylor, was the kind of man who built his legacy on being right and never once apologized for it. A corporate lawyer with tailored suits and a Rolex for every decade, he was equal parts charming and cold. To the outside world, he was generous, successful, articulate. At home, he measured worth by silence and obedience. Emotion, he once told Madison when she was 11 and crying over a lost pet, is for those who can afford to lose. Her mother, Elaine, was a perfect mirror of that belief. Always polished, always on the edge of exhaustion, always reminding Madison, "We don't cry in front of people. We smile, we rise, and we win." So Madison did. She smiled like a pageant queen. She rose like champagne. And she won even when it meant slicing at others to do so. She wasn't born cruel. That part developed gradually. It started small, like a muscle she exercised without knowing it. A classmate forgot their lines in a school recital. Madison rolled her eyes and whispered, "So embarrassing," loud enough to be heard. The teacher didn't scold her. Her mother, in the car ride home, even said, "That's leadership, baby. Know the difference between rising stars and falling ones." That kind of praise, subtle and poisonous, became the fertilizer for her superiority. By the time she reached sophomore year, Madison had perfected the art of control. Not just of her image, but of people. She could read a room faster than most teachers. She knew who needed a compliment, who would crumble under pressure, and, most of all, who no one else would defend. That's what made Reggie so easy. He didn't belong to their world. He didn't fight back. He didn't even look her in the eye unless he had to. In her mind, that was permission. If someone refuses to protect their own dignity, then wasn't it fair game? But the truth, the one she buried too deep to face, was that mocking Reggie wasn't about him. It was about her. Her life was a carefully curated performance, but inside, it throbbed with tension. Every test had to be perfect. Every outfit camera-ready. Her friendships were strategic alliances. Her relationships were rehearsals for power. The only time she felt release was when she could control something without consequence. Reggie became that outlet. She mocked his walk, like he's dragging centuries behind him. She teased his gloves. Maybe he's afraid of catching Rich. She joked about the way he hummed while mopping. Creepy, like horror movie background noise. And the worst part? People laughed. Not all of them, not loudly, but enough. Enough to teach her that cruelty, when done with a smile, passes for entertainment. And when your father's a donor and your mother's on the board, no one really checks your motives. Only once had anyone pushed back. It was Eli, quiet, bookish, 2 years younger. After one particularly loud jab in the hallway, he muttered under his breath, "You know, you don't have to be mean to feel important." She paused, turned, smiled that surgical smile. "I don't feel important. I am." And with that, she walked away, her heels echoing power on tile. Still, something about Eli's words stayed with her. Not because she felt guilty, she didn't, not then, but because it was the first time someone had reminded her that there might be another way to exist. It was like hearing a foreign language you barely understood, but somehow knowing it was speaking about you. The rest of the time, she buried that unease under layers of busy. There were college tours to attend, SAT tutors to please, dresses to try on for spring gala season. Her calendar didn't allow for introspection, and her soul had grown allergic to stillness. But sometimes, at night, when the lights were out and the silence settled in like soft ash, Madison stared at her ceiling and wondered why nothing felt satisfying. She had the life people envied, the looks, the access, the future. So why did it all feel like stage lighting, warm and bright and utterly fake? One night, she caught herself watching Reggie through the upstairs window. He was mopping alone in the main corridor. It was past 8 p.m. The hallway lights cast a glow around him like a spotlight, and he moved with a calm so alien to her that it made her chest tighten. He didn't seem hurried, or bitter, or small. He just was. For a moment, she envied that. Not the job, never that, but the stillness, the kind of peace that can't be bought or faked, terrified her. She snapped a photo, almost out of habit, labeled it Hamilton's Haunted Janitor, sent it to her group chat with a laughing emoji, got a few LOLs in return. Should have felt fun. But the moment she locked her screen, something in her stomach turned. It was small, barely noticeable, but it was there. Still, she brushed it off, because that was the rule: control the narrative. Even if the story you're telling is eating you alive. Her parents never asked how she was. They asked what she had achieved. Her friends never asked what she felt. They asked what she wore. And Reggie, well, he never asked anything at all, which made him the safest to hurt. Until the fire. Until that night when the power went out and the silence was filled not with ash, but screams. Until the night her vision blurred from smoke and her legs buckled from fear, and she realized that no amount of privilege could teach you how to breathe when the air itself had turned against you. Until she felt arms. Not soft, not gentle, but sure. Wrap around her like a lifeline and lift her from the edge of death. And when she opened her eyes again, and found out who had carried her through the flames, the laugh that had once come so easily died inside her throat. Because in that moment, every insult, every joke, every jab wasn't just a mistake. It was an indictment. She had mocked the very hands that saved her life. And for the first time in years, Madison Taylor didn't feel powerful. She felt seen. Madison would later remember fragments. Not the fire itself, those details would be gone, burned away by adrenaline and shock, but sensations, flashes of sound and heat that didn't make sense in the moment. The first thing was the screaming. It wasn't the dramatic, high-pitched shrieking that movies made you expect. It was lower, realer, like something being torn out of someone's throat. Then came the smell. Burning plastic, hair, and something else she'd never smelled before. Fear. It had a taste. Bitter. Metallic. She remembered grabbing her phone but couldn't remember if she'd ever dialed. She remembered running, then crawling, then the unbearable weight of smoke in her chest like she was drowning in dry water. The fire had spread fast. Faster than anyone expected. The speaker wires, the overworked outlets, the disabled detectors. It all came together like a perfect storm. Within minutes, the art wing was choked in smoke. The old HVAC system, recently reactivated to circulate heat better, did the opposite. It pumped smoke and heat like a silent arsonist through every open vent. Lights flickered. Ceiling tiles began to sag. The floor was covered in footprints and chaos. Glass had shattered somewhere. Someone screamed about someone else passing out. But no one stopped running. Madison had lost her footing near the back hallway, her heel catching on the edge of a fallen backpack. She hit the ground hard, her chin smacking tile, the taste of blood in her mouth immediate and thick. She tried to scream, but the smoke stole it from her throat before it ever reached the air. She pushed herself up, palms slipping, coughing so violently it felt like something was breaking inside her ribs. There was a red exit sign glowing faintly down the corridor, but the hallway was already filling like a tunnel underwater. Every breath was a gamble. Her eyes were stinging. Her hands shook. She wasn't thinking of Reggie. She wasn't thinking of the party. She wasn't even thinking about survival. Not in a conscious way. Her body wanted to live. Her mind was slipping. And then a sound. Not a siren. Not a scream. Boots. Heavy. Purposeful. Coming closer. And then arms. Strong, rough, steady. Not grabbing, lifting. Someone pulled fabric over her face. Her coat, maybe. A towel? A voice? Calm and focused. Stay low. Hold tight. She clung. Madison couldn't see him. Not through the blur, the smoke, the heat, but she felt everything. The urgency, the control, the sureness of someone who didn't guess, who didn't hesitate. Every movement was precise. Down the hallway, left through the science wing, past a door she thought was sealed shut. He kicked it. It flew open. Cold air slammed into her like a wall. Then another door. Glass breaking. Wind. And finally, outside. She was laid gently on the grass behind the school, near the staff parking lot. The stars looked brighter than she remembered. She rolled onto her side and vomited. A hand rested on her back, firm but kind. Then silence. When she opened her eyes fully, he was already turning away, walking back toward the building, back into the smoke. She tried to call out. Nothing came. Later, much later, when the fire trucks had come, when the crowd had gathered, when sirens had replaced screams, and students stood wrapped in foil blankets with wide, hollow eyes, she asked the paramedic, "Who pulled me out?" The woman pointed toward the curb. A man sitting alone on the edge of the pavement, hunched slightly forward, holding a wet towel to his forearm. A man in an old hoodie, jeans covered in soot, sneakers burned at the toes. He was breathing slowly, eyes closed. It was Reggie, the janitor, the man she had laughed at, mocked, ignored, the man who had saved her life. Her breath caught, not because of the pain, not because of the fire, but because in that moment, everything in her world inverted. The power dynamic, the hierarchy, the stories she had told herself, they all fell apart in one impossible image. A man society had painted invisible was now the only reason she was alive. And he hadn't even looked back. Reggie hadn't planned to run back inside. But when you've done it once, when you've tasted flame, known the timing of destruction by heart, it's not a question of if. It's automatic. The moment Madison was safe, his feet turned before his mind did. He went in again, found 2 more students trapped in the supply closet. One too scared to move. One passed out. He carried them both, one over each shoulder. He burned his arm opening a door jammed shut. Didn't care. His legs cramped. His throat ached. He moved anyway. By the time the fire department arrived, Reggie had pulled 5 students out on his own. He didn't make a speech. He didn't wait for thanks. He sat quietly on the curb until the last ambulance left. Then he stood, brushed ash from his pants, and walked home. News traveled fast by Monday, not just of the fire, but of the janitor who saved lives. There were calls from local journalists. A few students tried to start a GoFundMe for Hero Janitor. The administration scrambled to prepare a press release, to spin the incident as a sobering reminder of how heroes live among us. Photos of Reggie's scarred hands began to circulate. A teacher mentioned his past, how he used to be a firefighter, how he lost someone he loved. But none of that mattered as much as the look on Madison's face when she walked into the school that first day back. Gone were the heels, the lip gloss, the coat. She wore sneakers, jeans, a hoodie. Her eyes scanned the hallway, not for her friends, not for cameras, for him. She found Reggie by the window of the library, wiping down fingerprints from the glass. She stood for a long moment, then walked toward him. He didn't turn. Not until she spoke. "Mr. Baker?" He paused, turned slowly, met her eyes. There it was again, that tired gaze, not empty, but full, of history, of pain, of grace. She swallowed. Her voice cracked. "I never thanked you." Reggie looked at her, said nothing, She tried again. I didn't know. I never saw you. Not really. And I should have. I should have seen who you were. A long pause. He nodded once, then turned back to the glass and wiped away one last smudge. The school wanted a press conference. They said it would be a moment of healing and an opportunity to honor unsung heroes. They drafted statements. They wrote headlines before Reggie even said yes. The principal sent out an email blast, using phrases like unexpected bravery and the man behind the mop. Students were told they could write thank you notes. Staff were encouraged to share stories that highlight the positive. There was talk of naming a hallway after him, maybe even a plaque near the library. But Reggie didn't show up for the ceremony. He wasn't sick. He wasn't avoiding anyone. He just didn't see the point. His job hadn't changed. The building still needed mopping. Desks still needed scrubbing. The same students who ignored him before were now waving awkwardly, saying his name with too much emphasis, as if they just learned it had value. And he didn't know what to do with that. Respect that came only after fire felt more like guilt than gratitude. So he let it be what it was, a phase. Eventually, they'd forget again. That's how the world worked. Madison didn't forget. She tried to approach him again the following week, but Reggie didn't slow his pace. He nodded, polite, but distant. Not cold, never cold. Just closed. She respected it. She didn't push. Instead, she started noticing things she had never bothered to look at before, like how Reggie always checked the fire exits quietly at the end of his shift, or how he helped a special needs student find their locker without saying a word, just a soft hand guiding gently, or how he'd replace torn posters with new ones, aligning the edges like a perfectionist. His presence had never been passive. It had simply been overlooked. What really changed Madison, though, wasn't what Reggie did. It was what she learned about what he had once been. It started with a conversation in the main office. Madison was there to turn in a form. Mrs. Dorsey, the history teacher, was chatting with the receptionist. I told you, Dorsey was saying. He used to be a firefighter, one of the best in Detroit. Lost his wife in a blaze. That's why he left. Madison froze. The receptionist frowned. Wait, seriously? I knew someone from back there. Said he was legendary. They called him the Wall because he never went down. Never panicked. Just kept moving forward. The receptionist shook her head slowly. What's someone like that doing mopping our floors? Dorsey's answer was quiet but firm. Healing. Or hiding. Sometimes both. Madison walked out of the office without saying a word. That evening, she searched online. Detroit firefighter Reginald T. Baker. It wasn't easy to find. He'd never sought attention. But there it was. A local article from 12 years ago. Headline: Veteran firefighter resigns after wife's death in house fire. The photo showed a younger Reggie, eyes sharper, but still carrying that same quiet gravity. He was standing in front of a burned-out home, his helmet tucked under one arm. The caption: Baker says he's stepping back to honor her memory. Madison kept reading. He had served 21 years, saved over 50 lives, received 2 medals, led fire safety initiatives in underfunded neighborhoods, volunteered at after-school programs, trained rookie firemen. But what haunted her most was the interview quote: You never really stop running into the fire, you just start doing it in other ways. She sat back in her chair. Her screen dimmed. She didn't move. This man, the man she'd laughed at, dismissed, reduced, had once stood between life and death for people he didn't even know. And not for recognition, not for praise, simply because it was who he was. The weight of her shame wasn't loud. It didn't come as tears or panic. Came as stillness. A quiet sort of grief for all the ways she'd been blind. Later that week, Madison wrote a letter. Not for school. Not for extra credit. Just for him. She placed it inside a plain envelope and left it tucked under the edge of his mop bucket in the janitor's closet. No one saw her do it. The letter read, Mr. Baker, I don't know if you'll ever read this. I don't know if you'll care to. But I need to say this. I used to think I was powerful. I used to think being on top meant being untouchable, unstoppable, unbothered. I thought silence was weakness. I thought kindness was decoration. And then one night, the world turned upside down. And the only thing that saved me was a man I never took the time to know. I mocked you. I hurt you. I erased your humanity with my words. And you still gave me your strength. I will never understand how someone can hold so much pain and still choose to save someone who caused more. I read about your wife. I read about what you used to do. You weren't just a firefighter. You were a shield. And maybe still are. You once said in an interview, "You never really stop running into the fire." I don't know if you meant that literally, but I felt it. In your arms. In your calm. In your silence. I can't erase what I said, but I can learn from who you are. And I will. Thank you for carrying me out. For carrying so many. Sincerely, Madison. He never mentioned the letter. But she noticed, one day, a sticky note on her locker. Just 3 words. Written in a familiar, steady hand. Keep walking forward. No name.
No signature.
But she knew. From that point forward, Madison's life didn't change overnight. She still had privilege. She still had power. But now she also had perspective. She started listening more, talking less. She apologized to Eli. She helped the library staff restock shelves. She asked teachers real questions. When someone mocked the new custodian, she didn't scold them. She looked at them until they fell silent. She joined a youth mentorship program downtown. She asked her father to donate anonymously to the city fire fund. And every week she brought an extra sandwich to school. Left it outside the janitor's closet. No note. No thanks. Just placed it there quietly, then walked away. She never asked Reggie about his past. Not directly. She didn't need to. His silence was enough. Carried more history than any story she'd ever read. She did see him smile once. Briefly. She'd passed him in the hall and nodded. He'd nodded back. But as he turned the corner, she saw his reflection in the glass. A small, tired smile flickered across his face. It vanished quickly. But it was there. And in that moment, she realized something simple and profound. Heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they carry keys. And silence. And scars. The day Madison read the letter aloud wasn't marked by balloons or banners. There were no cameras in the gymnasium, no official press coverage. Just a quiet email announcement from the principal about a brief student-led address during Thursday's assembly. Most people expected the usual, a campaign speech, a new club pitch, another announcement about recycling bins in the cafeteria. No one expected what came next. Not even Madison's friends. Especially not Madison's father. She had asked for it, this moment, not out of obligation but necessity. Not to make noise, but to make peace. The kind of peace that doesn't come from being forgiven, but from telling the truth, out loud, without dressing it up. She had spent weeks rewriting her words, erasing every sentence that felt too rehearsed, too clean. Her first draft was defensive. Her second tried too hard to sound enlightened. But by the 10th version, she stopped writing like someone trying to fix her image. She wrote like someone who knew they couldn't. That morning, she dressed simply. White shirt, jeans, no makeup. She pulled her hair into a low braid. No fanfare, just herself. Her real self. The one that had been quietly reshaping since the night the smoke swallowed everything she thought she knew. When she stepped onto the stage in the gym, the microphone squealed once, then fell silent. She took a breath. Her heart pounded, but her hands were steady. The lights above her hummed. Hundreds of students watched, some whispering. She unfolded a single piece of paper and began to speak. You all know me. You've seen me in the hallways, in class, at the dances, on the stage. Maybe you've seen my face in the newsletters my mom sends out. Maybe you've rolled your eyes at my speeches or posts or the way I always seem to have something to say. But today, I'm not here to talk about what I've done. I'm here to talk about what I almost destroyed. A few weeks ago, I was at a party here at school. It wasn't authorized. It wasn't safe. And I made the choice to be there anyway. That night, a fire broke out. Most of us were lucky. Some of us were lucky because we ran. But I didn't get to run. I was trapped. Couldn't breathe. Couldn't move. I was on the floor, and everything felt like it was ending. And then someone carried me out. I didn't know his name. Not really. I had said his name before, but never with respect. Never with recognition. I had used his name like a joke. Or worse, avoided it completely. I had laughed at him, called him things, shared pictures of him behind his back. He saved me anyway. Mr. Reginald Baker didn't owe me anything. He owed none of us anything. But he ran into the fire. He didn't ask who we were. He didn't stop to check which ones had mocked him. He just acted. He moved like he'd done it 100 times before. Because he had. Because before he came here, before we reduced him to the janitor, he had been a firefighter, a hero, a husband, a leader, and we didn't see him. I didn't see him until he was carrying me into the cold night air, and I realized everything I thought made someone important was smoke and mirrors. Mr. Baker doesn't want attention. He doesn't ask for praise. And that's exactly why he deserves it more than anyone. So this is not just an apology. It's not just a thank you. This is a confession and a promise. I'm not who I thought I was, and I don't want to be that person again. I'm writing this letter because sometimes, when you've hurt someone, the only thing you can do is hold their name up higher than your own. Mr. Baker, if you hear this, know that I see you now, and I hope someday you might be able to see me as more than who I used to be. There was no applause. Not immediately. Just a long, stretching quiet that settled over the room like snow. Students stared. Some at the floor. Some at Madison. Some at nothing in particular, just lost in thought. A few wiped their eyes. Eli nodded once from the back row. The principal looked stunned. His arms crossed tightly, as if trying to hold in whatever emotion had risen in his chest. Then came the hands. Slowly, softly, one by one they clapped. Not the usual school assembly clatter, but something gentler, something real. Reggie was not in the gym that day. He had excused himself from the morning shift, claiming an errand. But he heard about it. People told him. Students passed him in the hallway differently that afternoon. No longer with forced enthusiasm, but with quieter respect. Not loud, but honest. Later that day, in the janitor's closet, tucked neatly between the cleaning logs and a box of gloves, was a folder. Inside, a printed copy of the speech. And on the back, written in blue pen, were 3 words in Madison's handwriting. Still walking forward. Reggie didn't smile. Not outwardly. But something in him exhaled. Something old. Something that had been holding its breath for years. He folded the page once, slipped it into the inner pocket of his jacket, and went back to work. Weeks passed. Madison kept showing up. Not to clean, not to prove anything. Just to be present. To help quietly where needed. To sit next to the students no one sat with. To stop laughing when someone else's name became a punchline. She didn't post it on social media. She didn't tell her parents. It wasn't about transformation as performance. It was about practice. Rebuilding herself one choice at a time. Her father didn't understand. He asked if she was depressed. Her mother blamed hormones. But Madison didn't argue. She didn't need them to understand. Not yet. One afternoon, she found Reggie in the courtyard. He was scrubbing a bench where someone had spilled juice. The sun cast a soft light across his back. "Can I sit?" she asked. He nodded. She waited, then said, "I want to volunteer. Somewhere that matters." He didn't look up, just kept scrubbing. Then finally, "Start with one person." She blinked. "Sorry." "One person," he said. "You can't fix everything. Just don't walk past what you can fix." She thought about that, then nodded. "I won't," she said. He stood, picked up his bucket, walked away. But this time it didn't feel like distance. It felt like trust. There's a photo in Madison's apartment now. It's framed simply, no ornate edges, no filters, no fake gloss. Just a black and white image taken years ago, from behind. A man in a janitor's uniform walking down an empty school hallway. bucket in one hand, mop in the other, light from the windows stretching ahead of him like a quiet blessing. You wouldn't know it was Reggie unless someone told you. That's the point. Madison likes it that way. She keeps it on the bookshelf, between a copy of The Fire Next Time and a worn edition of Letters to a Young Poet. Every time she walks past it, she remembers. She remembers the fire. She remembers the weight of his arms as he carried her out of smoke and into breath. She remembers how everything that once seemed important, titles, popularity, clothes, control, felt meaningless when her lungs couldn't find air. But more than the moment itself, she remembers what came after. The silence, the shame, the rebuilding. The years spent unlearning everything the world had taught her about worth and power. And the man who never asked for her apology but taught her to live like it mattered. It's been 7 years since that night. Madison is 25 now. She works at a nonprofit in the city that supports youth coming out of the juvenile justice system. Not exactly what her father had in mind. He still calls monthly, still tries to convince her to apply to law school. But the last time he visited her office, saw the mural on the wall painted by a 17-year-old who'd never held a brush before, something in his eyes softened. He didn't say anything, just nodded. She took it as enough. She doesn't tell her story often. Not to impress, not to gain sympathy. But every now and then, when she speaks to a group of students or sits on a panel, or is asked why she chose this work, she begins the same way. There was a man who carried me through fire, and I didn't even know his name. It stops people. It opens them. She tells them about Reggie, not as a savior in the Hollywood sense, but as a reminder that greatness often wears quiet shoes. That strength isn't always loud. That sometimes the people we overlook are the ones already saving the world behind the scenes. Reggie never saw the new building the school dedicated in his honor. Madison made sure of it anyway. She had lobbied the school board for months, not as a grand gesture, but as a quiet correction. The library wing was rebuilt after the fire. A plaque now hangs just inside the entrance, dedicated to Reginald T. Baker, for every quiet step that saved a life. He passed away 2 years ago, peacefully, in his sleep. Madison received the call from one of the school secretaries. She hadn't known he was sick. He never told anyone, just like him.
No announcements. No farewells.
Just a note found in his apartment. If you're reading this, don't cry too long. I had a good run. Please water the plant by the window. She attended the memorial. So did dozens of students. Some brought letters. Some brought stories. One young man stood up and said, "He once found my sketchbook in the trash and gave it back." Said, "Don't throw away what heals you." I never forgot that. Another said Reggie helped him fix his bike chain every morning for a year. No one knew. No one asked. Reggie just did what needed doing. Madison spoke too. She didn't read from a paper this time. She spoke slowly, from somewhere deep. There are people who hold you together without you realizing it. People who never ask for thanks. People who see your worst and still choose to act in love. Mr. Baker didn't just save my life. He showed me who I was, and who I didn't want to be anymore. He taught me that redemption isn't about grand gestures. It's about consistent grace. About showing up. About carrying what others drop, even if they never notice. Her voice cracked, but she kept going. He never said much, but when he did, it landed. She paused, then finished. And I carry him with me, every day. Not just because he saved me, but because he made me want to live differently. After the memorial, she walked to the edge of the city park, where someone had planted a small tree in his name, a sapling, still growing. She touched the leaves gently, whispered a thank you she knew the wind would carry. Every year, on the anniversary of the fire, Madison writes a letter. Not for anyone to read, just for herself. She burns it safely, of course, in a small dish by her window, watches the smoke curl upward. It's not about guilt. Not anymore. It's about gratitude, about memory, about keeping something alive inside her that the world still needs. Sometimes she wonders how many people walk past someone like Reggie every day. At bus stops, in cafeterias, In back hallways, people holding a whole history in their silence. People who've buried wives, who've carried strangers, who've bled and stayed quiet and loved the world anyway. She hopes her story reminds at least one person to stop, to see, to ask, "Who are you, really?" before it's too late. There's a boy in her program named Jalen, 14, angry, too smart for his own good. He once told her, "People only pretend to care about you when you're about to die or when they need something from you." Madison didn't argue. She just nodded, and then said, "I know a man who proved that wrong." She's been working with Jalen for 8 months now. He started painting again, quietly, never shows his work, but he brings her sketches sometimes, folded in half, ink bleeding at the edges. The first time he did, she whispered, "Don't throw away what heals you." He didn't respond, but he kept drawing. She knows the cycle never ends. There will always be another hallway, another kid, another fire, literal or not. But she also knows she's not the same girl who used to laugh from the top of the stairs at the man with the mop and the deep eyes. She's the woman who remembers what it felt like to be carried. And she carries that forward, one person at a time, just like he told her, just like he lived.